What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and tomorrow night we are going to get what is probably the most anticipated playoff ranking we have ever gotten since the playoff era began, just because this year is so different, and it's going to be really interesting to see what the committee does with all these teams that have played different amounts of games. And it's impossible to project, I think, perfectly. I'm going to do my best, but before we get into that projection, I'm going to give you my top 25, and it's going to be a little bit different this week. So every week, I do my top 25. It's something I've done throughout the entire season. But as I was looking at my top 25 this week, I thought, this is going to be very similar to my playoff projections. And so I want to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to do my top 25 a little bit different this week, to where I just rank the teams simply like this. All right, I'm going to rank the teams based on who I think the better team is, who I think would win on a neutral field if the team is 100% healthy. If they have all their players, then I'm going to say who would win that matchup head-to-head. And I just go down the line and rank these teams. So it's not going to be about resume. It's not going to be about any of the playoff criteria or who won head-to-head, any of that. It's simply who I think the better team is, who I think the team is that would win if the teams played head-to-head and they were full strength. We're not talking about a team that has injuries or whatever. Now, if a team has an injury where a player is out for the year, I wouldn't include that in there because obviously that matchup would not happen because that player is not going to come back this year. But if it's a guy that's been out or whatever, I'm going to put them in there. For example, Georgia. How would Georgia look with JT Daniels at quarterback and with all of their guys on defense? Same thing with Clemson. If their defense was 100% healthy, how good do I think they would be? How would they match up with these other teams? So that's the way I did my top 25, and I will do that the rest of the season, just basically telling you guys who I think the better teams are. So you're going to see some teams that are in the top 25 and deserve to be in the top 25, but they're not going to be in my top 25 just because I don't think they would beat these other teams head-to-head. So I'm going to give it all to you here on one screen before we get into the playoff projections. I've got Alabama number 1, Clemson number 2, Notre Dame number 3. So a perfect example here. If I was ranking the teams, doing a top 25 and giving the teams what they deserve, Notre Dame deserves to be ranked ahead of Clemson. They beat them head-to-head. But if they played on a neutral field and both teams were 100% healthy, I would take Clemson to win that game. So I'm putting Clemson at number 2, Notre Dame at number 3. Same thing with Florida and Texas A&M. A&M beat Florida head-to-head. But if they played this weekend on a neutral field, I would take Florida. So I'm putting Florida ahead of Texas A&M. Ohio State at number 6. I really think those first 5 teams would beat Ohio State right now. And that's another thing. I'm judging these teams based off of right now, how they're playing right now, and how they would play with all of their players if they're missing players. So I've got Ohio State number 6 and Oklahoma at number 7. I know they got 2 losses, but you look at the way this team's playing right now, it's going to be tough to beat them. Would BYU or Cincinnati beat Oklahoma right now? I don't think so. So I've got the Sooners all the way up to number 7, Georgia at number 8. Now that they have a quarterback, and if they were back healthy on defense, Richard LeCounte coming back, I think is big for them, one of their better players. Georgia, I think, would be a really good team the rest of the season. So I've got them at number 8. BYU and Cincinnati at 9 and 10. Cincinnati has a better resume than BYU, but I think BYU would actually beat them. I really like the way this team plays. They're physical on both sides of the ball. Zach Wilson has been phenomenal. Desmond Ritter's been really good for Cincinnati, but I just think BYU is a little bit better. But that will be a great matchup, and we might see that matchup in a New Year's Six bowl. I think that has been one of the projections we have given you on our New Year's Six projections. Maybe the last time we did it, we didn't do it last week just because I didn't really have any changes. This week I'll probably do a new New Year's Six projection, especially after seeing the playoff rankings. That's probably going to change some things. I've got Miami at number 11, Northwestern at number 12, Wisconsin at number 13. This one's tough because, on a neutral field, I think Wisconsin would beat Northwestern, but it's very close, and I really couldn't decide. I think Wisconsin's still a really good team. They had a bad game against Northwestern, had some turnovers. I'm going to keep Northwestern ahead of them just because it's tough for me to definitively say that I think Wisconsin would win that game. And then I have Oregon at number 14, USC at number 15, Indiana at 16, Texas 17, Oklahoma State at number 18, Iowa State at number 19, Auburn at number 20, Coastal Carolina at number 21, North Carolina 22, West Virginia 23, NC State 24, Boston College 25. again, these teams, West Virginia, NC State, Boston College, they don't deserve to be ranked, really. I mean, they've got 3 losses. Boston College actually has 4 losses, but I think Boston College would beat Tulsa, SMU, Marshall, Washington, or Liberty. I really do. I think if they played this week on a neutral field, I would take Boston College. So that's why I have them ranked. It's not about the resume in this top 25. It's simply based on who I think the better teams are. But I did put honorable mention Tulsa, SMU, Marshall, Washington, and Liberty because I think those are good teams. I know I don't have them ranked here, even though they are in the top 25. Maybe Liberty fell out. I don't think Washington's in there. But I do want to acknowledge that these are good teams, and they would beat a lot of the Power 5 teams. I think they'd probably beat any Power 5 team that you don't see on this screen. But they just, I don't think, are quite good enough to make it into the top 25. I don't think they would beat these teams. Again, West Virginia, NC State, Boston College, North Carolina. Although North Carolina is kind of tough because how horrible their defense has been, but their offense is so good. You'd have to think that offense would be good enough to beat a team like Tulsa, SMU. I don't know, though. It would be a great matchup, I think. And again, once you get past, I'd say Auburn, 21 down, including the honorable mentions, I think is very close. Coastal Carolina is a very good football team. I think they beat some of these other teams. But would Coastal Carolina beat a team like Texas or Auburn? I don't think so. I just don't think they're that good. They've had a lot of close wins. They deserve to be ranked, don't get me wrong. But I just don't know that they're a great team or anything like that. So that's my top 25. Now I'm going to give you my playoff projection. How I think the committee is going to rank the teams this first ranking. And if you have never watched my videos in the past, you can go back in previous years and see that I believe I've been the most accurate in projecting the initial playoff rankings, more accurate than any other source that you're going to find. You can go back, especially, I think last year was not a great year for me, but the year before, I predicted things that no one else was predicting, and then they came to be true. So I think I've done you can go back and look again at my track record. It speaks for itself. I've been very accurate in predicting what the committee is going to do. Having said that, this year's different. I don't think anyone can really predict it. We don't know what they're going to do with these teams that simply have not had the same amount of games, and the resumes are going to be totally different. And it makes it very tough to predict what the committee is going to do. I think once we get this initial ranking, that gives us a good idea of what they're going to do moving forward. But this first one, I'm telling you, it's tough to really figure out what they're going to do. I think they maybe look at the eye test a little bit more this year. If they don't, then there's going to be a lot of shock in these first rankings, because if they don't go by who they think is the best, the eye test, whatever, and they simply go by resume, you're going to see some teams that you expect to be ranked really high, ranked really low. They're going to be outside the top 10. A team that you think is a top 5 team potentially may not even be in the top 10, or might be closer to 8, 9, or 10. I think it's going to be a combination of both. I think they have to look at both. But at the end of the day, again, we really don't know what they're going to do. So this is my best guess. Again, I'm not expecting to be very accurate on this first one, just because I don't know what they're going to do with all those different circumstances. But based off of what they've done in the past, I'm going to try to project this as close as I possibly can. So we start at the bottom. I've got Washington at number 25. They're 2-0. They were really impressive against Arizona, an Arizona team that took USC into the fourth quarter. I think actually had a lead in that game. So I think Washington has done enough, and I really couldn't find another team that I thought deserved to be number 25. You got North Carolina in there. They don't really have any quality wins. And win over NC State's probably their best win. I think Washington, because they have not lost a game, and just because of how impressive they were this past weekend, that might be enough to get them in there, but I don't know. I really don't feel good about number 25. There was really no one I felt good about putting in that spot. I've got Auburn at number 24, Texas at number 23. Texas really doesn't have a signature win outside of that Oklahoma State win, and they've got some bad losses. They've got some close games. TCU's kind of a bad loss, and then also you have Texas Tech. That was a very, very close game. They could have easily lost that game. Auburn maybe should have lost to Arkansas. Some people still say that they did lose to Arkansas. So these teams really just don't have a lot on the resume, but we've seen them look good at times. We've seen them compete with good teams, so I don't know. It's kind of tough for me to see them ranked much higher than this. And then you have Wisconsin and Indiana at 21 and 22. It's also kind of tough to see, to say what the committee's going to do with these teams. Wisconsin has only played 3 games, but they looked really impressive in their first 2 games. And then this last game against Northwestern, turnovers killed them, but they still looked like a pretty good team. I think the committee, and it comes down with Wisconsin and Indiana, it comes down to their common opponent, Michigan. Wisconsin was more dominant against Michigan than Indiana was, and I think when you're trying to compare those 2 teams, you have to look at common opponents, and I think that's what would put Wisconsin over Indiana, so 21 and 22. But again, not a lot of games, no real signature wins for these teams. Indiana has, racked up some wins, but it's against bad teams. I mean, they haven't really beaten any good teams. Penn State is obviously terrible this year. Michigan's not very good. Rutgers, I mean, there's just nothing there really on the resume, but we have seen them compete with Ohio State, and that's enough, I think, for them to be ranked. So that's where I've got, that's why I'm projecting Wisconsin and Indiana. Again, me personally, I've got these teams higher. I think Wisconsin's a really good team still, but I don't know that the committee is going to give them much of a reward for a 2-1 start. USC at number 20, they are 3-0. Finally looked good this past weekend. I think the committee will definitely look at that. Tulsa at number 19, they're 5-1. Tough team to project what they're going to do. They say the margin of victory is not something that they look at, and so that bodes well for Tulsa because they've won a lot of close games. They've had to come from behind in the fourth quarter multiple times. But again, that one loss came to Oklahoma State. They were somewhat competitive in that game, actually very competitive in that game. And so I think the committee will rank Tulsa at around number 19, Marshall at number 18. The win over Appalachian State is what gets them ranked. Without that win, I don't know if this team is even ranked in the top 25 because they just have not played anyone else. Iowa State at number 17, Oklahoma State at number 16. The Cowboys have the head-to-head there, so I think that's what puts them over Iowa State. So Oklahoma State at 5-2, Iowa State 6-2. And again, when we talk about head-to-head, I don't know how much it's going to matter this year with all the different factors, but I think Louisiana has to be ranked ahead of Iowa State. They beat them head-to-head. They're 7-1. They've got some nice wins on the resume. And so I think Louisiana will wind up ranked right here around number 15. If they look at some of these games and say, well, they had a lot of close games, then maybe they're not ranked as high. But again, margin of victory is not supposed to matter. So I've got Louisiana at number 15, Oregon at number 14. Really no signature wins so far. Washington State, Stanford, they struggle with UCLA. I don't even know if they'll be ranked this high. They might be lower, but I think that the name brand of Oregon will, and this should not matter, but I think it does some with the committee, but I think that will give them enough of a boost to get them around number 14. BYU at number 13, 9-0. They played 9 games. They're 9-0. They haven't lost. They've blown almost everyone out, but I still don't think the committee is going to give them a very high ranking because of a couple of things. First of all, their 2 toughest games, I would say, the best teams they've played, Houston and Boise State. All right, Houston, that game was close. I think Houston maybe even had a lead in the third quarter. So BYU didn't dominate in that game, although they did pull away late. And then Boise State, they were playing with a third-string quarterback, had some guys out. I think their starting running back was out in that game. The committee looks at these things, and while I think BYU's a really good team, I don't know that the committee is going to give them much respect. Maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe they do go by that eye test and say, this team, we can look at them and tell they're a top 10 team. That will be very interesting. I want to see what in previous years, I think BYU would be around number 13. If all the teams had played 8 or 9 games, I think BYU would be outside the top 10. But since they played 9 games, maybe that's enough. And because they've been dominant in most of those games, maybe that's enough to get them ranked higher. We'll see. But if you look at Coastal Carolina, they've got the better resume. They've got a win over a top 25 Louisiana team, and they've also got a win over a very solid Appalachian State team. So I think Coastal Carolina would have the better resume, although their games have been closer. But again, margin of victory is not supposed to matter. Coastal Carolina has the better resume. They've got a couple of solid wins. I know they're a group of 5 team, but still, and when you look at that resume, I think Coastal Carolina could be ranked ahead of BYU, which would be a big surprise for a lot of people. I've got them at number 12. Miami at number 11. They've got, the loss to Clemson, and then they've got some pretty good wins, but nothing great. NC State was a decent win. Virginia Tech, who is now playing terrible. There's just not much there. So I think just the fact that their one loss came to Clemson, that's going to be enough to keep them ranked fairly high. But they could really use a signature win, and I don't think they're going to get it when you look at their schedule. They actually have a pretty soft schedule this year, considering some of the teams that have not panned out. Now, North Carolina, they still play them. That could be a good game there for them. And here's 6 through 10. We start with Georgia at number 10 at 5-2. The good news for Georgia is who they lost to: Florida and Alabama, 2 top 5 teams. Also, they have a top 25 win over Auburn. So I think that is going to be enough for Georgia to be ranked in the top 10. Oklahoma at number 9, they're 6-2. I know they've got a couple of losses that are not great losses, but the committee looks at things like players out, injuries, suspensions. They had several guys injured, or not injured, but suspended early in the season that are now back. And when you look at the way this team is playing now, and you also look at the fact that those 2 losses that they had big leads early. They just kind of blew it. It's not like they were beaten, soundly or anything. I think the committee will put Oklahoma up pretty high. The only problem I have is maybe because of the losses. Like Kansas State is not a good loss now. Kansas State is not a very good team. But I think they were better at that time with Skylar Thompson at quarterback, and I feel like that team was playing better at that time. I think the committee rewards Oklahoma for the fact that they had some guys out in those games, and just the way that they're playing right now. I think Oklahoma will be ranked pretty high. We've seen it in the past. It seemed like they've kind of ranked Oklahoma high. So I really don't know what they're going to do. It's a team that you could make an argument should be behind Iowa State, because Iowa State beat them head-to-head. But I think they have to be ahead of Oklahoma State because they just beat them. So I don't know where Oklahoma winds up. They could be between Oklahoma State and Iowa State, or maybe just ahead. I don't know. There's no way to rank those teams because of the head-to-head. So I don't know where Oklahoma winds up, but I'm just gonna go with my gut and say they put them around number 9. Northwestern at number 8, 5-0. It's interesting when you look at Ohio State and Northwestern and you say who has the better resume so far. Not looking at margin of victory, who has the better resume? I think Northwestern would actually say that they have a better resume. A win over Wisconsin, who I think is a little better than Indiana, and then they've beat some decent teams. Iowa's not bad. Purdue's not bad. Ohio State has really just played nobody outside of Indiana. Penn State is terrible. Nebraska is terrible. Rutgers, not a very good team. So there's really not much for Ohio State to put on the resume. It really depends on how the committee views Indiana. Does the committee view Indiana as a top 15 team? If they do, I think Ohio State is probably ranked in the top 4. If they have Indiana outside the top 15, maybe outside the top 20, I don't think Ohio State will be in the top 4 because they didn't dominate against Indiana. And when you look at teams like Alabama and Clemson, I feel like they have dominated more against similar opponents, such as Indiana. So I just don't think Ohio State, because of their resume, is going to be ranked ahead of those top 5 teams. I've got them at number 6. Now, maybe the committee says, look, it's Ohio State. We know they're a great team. They passed the eye test, all of that. Maybe they put them in the top 4. But if we're going by resume and we're going by what the committee has done in the past, Ohio State will not be in the top 4 in these initial rankings. So we'll see what they do there. Cincinnati, 8-0. You could definitely argue Cincinnati has a better resume than Ohio State, and they have been more dominant in their games. You look at a win over SMU, a dominant win. You look at Houston, compare their win against Houston to BYU. Cincinnati's was better, but I think this UCF game is going to hold them back a little bit because UCF is a solid team, but they were missing a lot of guys. It's just not the team that it was going to be in the preseason this year because they've had so many opt-outs and players getting kicked off the team. So Cincinnati there at number 7 for me could be ahead of Ohio State, but I think the win over Indiana might be a little bit better than Cincinnati's win over SMU. And at the end of the day, I think the Buckeyes will stay ahead of Cincinnati. But those teams right there, Ohio State, Cincinnati, Northwestern, I wouldn't be surprised if they were in a different order, if even Northwestern was up to number 6, because their resume is not bad and they're 5-0. But I guess what's holding them back is some of those games have been pretty close. So now we go to the top 5. I've got Alabama at number 1, Notre Dame at number 2, Clemson number 3, Texas A&M number 4, Florida number 5. So why this order? I think Alabama is clearly number 1. I think Notre Dame is clearly number 2. I don't think there's going to be any real debate on the top 2 teams based off of what they have done. Clemson at number 3 for me because of what the committee looks at when they say they take into account players being out for injury or suspension. Clemson did not have Trevor Lawrence. They did not have some of their top players on defense against Notre Dame. I think because of that, the committee keeps Clemson at number 3. Also, Boston College, they had the injuries in that game as well. You go back to the games before that, this team was just dominant. They looked just like Alabama. And I think when you look at the entire season, Clemson has done enough to where they will be number 3. And I have Texas A&M ahead of Florida because of the head-to-head. It's I think close. I think you can make an argument for Florida because they have a win over Georgia, win over a top 10 win. But Texas A&M has a top 10 win in their win over Florida. They beat them head-to-head. I think it's going to go this way. Again, you can make an argument there. You could say Texas A&M, they were blown out by Alabama. Florida beat Georgia. There are a lot of different ways to look at this. But at the end of the day, one of the criteria the committee uses is head-to-head when teams are comparable. And I think these teams are comparable. They go to the head-to-head, and I think because of that, A&M will be at number 4. Now, I do think if Florida beats Alabama, even though they have the head-to-head loss to Texas A&M, I think that's going to be enough for Florida to move ahead of A&M just because they will add that big win to their resume. They'll be an SEC champion, all of that. So I wouldn't freak out, Florida fans, if you're behind A&M and you think, well, we don't have any way to move ahead of Texas A&M if they went out. No, you do. If you beat Alabama, you will jump A&M, you'll jump Alabama, and Florida will make it into the college football playoff. I have zero doubt about that. 100% guarantee if Florida wins out, they are in the college football playoff. So that's how I think the committee is going to do it. I would love to know what you guys think. Again, I'm not saying this is going to be correct. I really don't know. I don't feel confident like I have in years past just because of this year being so different. So we're going to find out tomorrow night, and hopefully I'll do a reaction video once those rankings come out. I'll give you my thoughts on what the committee did and maybe why they did it. So watch for that, again, coming up after the rankings tomorrow night. Thank you all for watching this video. And again, give me your feedback. Give me your top 25, what you think the committee is going to do down in the comments below. Again, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.